In the first video, we looked at the idea of explicit instruction and the way that it can improve the speed with which students understand new information. In the second video, I want to look at the idea of guided practice and independent practice in a bit more detail. The idea of practice is central to learning. If you wanted to get good at a musical instrument and all you did is listen to somebody explain and model how to do it, it wouldn't be much of a surprise if you were pretty rubbish. Guided practice has a really strong foundation in academic literature as well. There's a lot of research on information processing that supports the idea of guided practice. So when it comes to guided practice and making sure that information moves into a student's long-term memory, there are three things that are really central. The role of summarizing, rephrasing, and elaborating on what has been learned. I emphasize here that this isn't just practice. Practicing something in the wrong way or badly isn't going to help you get better at it. What helps is really closely guided practice, where we pay close attention to what we're doing and understand how to improve. So guided practice might look like a very high frequency of questions being asked by the teacher. When students make mistakes, they're quickly corrected to bring the student back online and ensure that their practice isn't of a mistake, but is of the correct answer or understanding. The reason why this is really important is that we want students to be getting around 80% of the questions we ask them correct. Obviously we can give cues and clues to them to try and get them into a position to answer the questions correctly. Yeah. If the figure falls much below 80%, that can be really demotivating for the students in our classes. Everybody wants to feel like they can be and are being successful to some extent. If it's 90%, the students are probably finding things too easy. If it's 60%, they're making so many mistakes that they're going to become frustrated and give up. Getting this balance right is a real challenge for teachers. Another consequence of students making too many mistakes in the work is that when they are set off to do independent practice, it's going to completely fall apart. And it's very likely that at this stage they will give up. So if you want students to be able to work on their own and become independent, one of the most important tools in a teacher's toolkit is the question for guiding students in practice. But a lot of us are making a lot of mistakes when we do that. I, for example, very often choose to ask the same 2 or 3 students in my class for the correct answer. And then when they get it, I congratulate myself on how well I've taught and move on to the next topic. This strategy is obviously going to be ineffective. But secondly, it's very often that I'll ask a question and then students will raise their hands, and within a second I'll have jumped on somebody to get them to answer and respond. The problem is that most of the people in the room haven't thought about the question or haven't had a chance to think about the question before they've already heard the answer. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the role of elaborative questioning, where you ask students to develop their answers and you probe them on the detail of what they're saying. This really requires the teacher to think carefully about the topic area that's being taught and to question in order to develop and challenge the ideas the student are putting forward. Now, this is really subject specific. You need to know your subject inside out if you want to be able to question somebody to a high level. I like to imagine myself as Jeremy Paxman at the front of the room quizzing students on their philosophy and ideas. But in your subject, this might look very different. Being suggested to improve questioning is the idea of basketball. You pass a question out to the class, and then you ask another student to elaborate on what's been said, another student to disagree with what's been said, and you can include a lot of students in the discussion. One of the best ways to find out and make sure all the students are listening is at the end of this process to return to one individual student and ask them to summarize the discussion that's been had so far. That this really changes the way that they engage. Rather than knowing that someone else will probably get asked or I can figure it out when it comes to me, they have to be listening all the time. Not all teaching involves asking questions and whole class discussions though. When students are sat on their own, getting on with solving or doing some work in guided practice, it's really important that the teacher is going around and checking answers. Actually reading the students' responses that they're writing during the guided practice, trying to spot mistakes and use these to help the students improve. The amount of guided practice that we give our students changes depending upon what's being taught and how experienced the students are. So an expert won't need much guided practice at all before they can become independent. Doing lots of guided practice on the most essential parts of our course fits really well with the model we spoke about last time for working memory. So if something's new to you, it puts a really high strain on your working memory, whereas if something's really familiar, then it doesn't. The content in your curriculum that's essential for future learning, it's really worth over-teaching this so that students become proficient. If we take something that's essential to understanding in a subject and we make it automatic, then it takes up very little mental effort to bring that back into our mind. One of the implications of this is that the building blocks of our subjects need to be almost over-taught. And this is why in primary schools a lot of time is being spent on number blocking. Understanding the relationship between numbers, for example, that 44 and 66 make 100, and getting students to know this inside out, allows them to spend all of their mental effort on the more challenging and difficult parts of mathematics as they get older. The foundational building blocks need to be automatized for effective teaching to take place later in that person's life. During independent practice, the teacher takes a step back and the student has a go on their own. They try out solving the problems without the support of the teacher. A way that this might be done is that you give them a range of different problems from different mathematical topics and expect them to select the right strategies to solve each. In English, this might involve writing an essay and developing an argument without you telling them exactly which order to put the paragraphs in. Another way we can do independent practice is to have paired work. One student has the steps or the model essay in front of them, and the other is expected to try and reproduce something along a similar line. At the end of the process, the student who had the book and the steps all along gives feedback to the other student on how they could improve and what they might have done differently. Students what to do. But once we've done this, we need to make sure that we're guiding them in practice, that they're elaborating, explaining, and summarizing what we've taught them. Unless we do this, they're never going to become masters in our subjects.